43-year-old Penny Bell seemed to have it all. A successful career, a loving husband and children, and a beautiful house in the country. But on June 6, 1991, her life came to a brutal end when she was stabbed to death in broad daylight in a West London car park. Her murder left a fractured family in its wake, and a decades-long mystery that may never be solved. This is the Case Remains podcast, episode 2, The Unsolved Murder of Penny Bell. Ruth Penelope Bell, known as Penny, was born on the 28th of February 1948. Described as a fun, vivacious woman who was liked by everyone she met, she was a successful businesswoman who co-owned a catering employment company. She'd been married for 10 years to an estate agent named Alistair and lived in Denham, a picturesque village in the Buckinghamshire countryside. Penny had a son named Matthew from her first marriage, and together she and Alistair had a daughter called Lauren. The morning of June 6, 1991 was like the start of any other day, giving no indication of the terrible event that was about to follow. Penny, Alistair and the kids got up, had their breakfast and got ready for work and school. Alistair left before Penny and described her mood that morning as bright and chirpy. She didn't wave him off as he left for work like she usually did, but Alistair put that down to there being so much commotion at the house. The Bells had builders working on their home at the time, as they were having an extension built on their kitchen. Penny had been chatting to the builders until about 9:40 in the morning, when she told them that she had to leave as she was running late for an appointment she'd scheduled for 9:50. She took a wood and wallpaper sample she'd been discussing with the builders and left the house in her blue Jaguar XJS car. But rather than head to her office in Kilburn, Penny drove to the Gurnell Grove Swimming Pool and Leisure Centre. Situated in the West London suburb of Greenford, it was about a mile off of her usual route and not somewhere she had ever been to before. It was half an hour later, at about 11 a.m, when two women parked next to Penny in the leisure centre car park. The car's hazard lights and windscreen wipers were on, and when they looked inside they saw Penny slumped over the steering wheel. Thinking that she had fallen asleep, they headed into the leisure centre. When they came back at 12:15, they realised that Penny was dead. The Metropolitan Police arrived on the scene to find her covered in blood. She had been stabbed more than 50 times. Two questions immediately sprang to mind. Why would anyone have done this, and how had nobody seen them? Forensic evidence determined that the attack had started from the passenger seat before the assailant walked around the car, opened the driver's side door, and continued to stab Penny in the chest and arms before coming back around to the passenger seat to finish the attack. An autopsy showed that the knife used in the attack was around 3 to 4 inches long, and also revealed that Penny had not been sexually assaulted prior to her murder. In the car, the wallpaper sample given to her by the builders had been placed between the driver and the passenger seat, almost as if Penny had been showing them to someone. Forensics were able to pull some fingerprints from the car that didn't belong to any of the Bell family, but apart from that there was little to no evidence in the vehicle, and a search of Penny's home also proved fruitless. As with most murders, suspicion immediately fell on those closest to Penny, and her husband Alistair was taken in to be interviewed by police. After a night of questioning, he was taken to identify Penny's body, then taken back to the station for further interviews. With no evidence of any involvement, Alistair was released, left with the task of telling his children that their mother wouldn't be coming home.
I miss every aspect of our life together. The only way I can describe it is that she was the other half of my personal jigsaw. And to lose that is to lose everything, basically. And the reason for my life now is the children.
It soon emerged that Alistair had been in a relationship with a man for 11 years before he married Penny. Alistair was open about his past, and his ex was even a guest at his and Penny's wedding. But the media coverage that followed didn't do the investigation any favours. Remember, this was just at the dawn of the 90s, when sadly attitudes to gay relationships weren't as accepting as they are today. To give you an idea, here's an extract from a newspaper article published 10 days after Penny's murder. Quote, "An electrician who has been working at the Bell's house for months shook his head about the homosexuality allegation. Alistair is an ordinary, likeable guy, he said. He isn't effeminate in any way and he is devoted to his wife and kids. End quote. Up until that point, police had been receiving up to 250 calls a day, but the day after the public found out Alistair had been in a gay relationship, not a single call came in. Combined with the fact that Alistair had inherited the bulk of Penny's estate, as well as a £200,000 life insurance payout, the public suspicion lingered over Alistair's involvement, despite the fact that he had a solid alibi. Soon, reports from the public came in that painted a picture of Penny's movements that morning. A dog walker called in a sighting at Black Park, which is about 5 minutes' drive from Penny's house, where at about 9:45 she saw a man waiting in a lay-by in a brown car. She then saw what she believed to be Penny's car pull up and the man get in on the passenger's side. Then a van driver reported seeing Penny's car between 10 and 10:30, driving slowly down the main road on the way to the leisure centre with the hazard lights on in her car. He remembered seeing a man with her who he described as in his 40s, possibly with a beard, dark hair, and wearing a bracelet on his right arm. According to the witness, as he overtook the car, he saw Penny attempt to pull over, but that the man grabbed the wheel and forced her to carry on driving. The witness assumed that she was just driving a new car she wasn't used to, and didn't think much of it until after the fact. Police also began to take a closer look at the people in and around the leisure centre that day. It's not clear if the car park has changed much in the last 27 years, but today it has 142 spaces. Despite it being a weekday morning, reports show that the car park was almost full at the time of the murder. As far as anyone knew, Penny had no reason to go to the leisure centre and didn't have anything in the car to indicate that she had gone there for a swim. From photos of the crime scene, you can see that Penny's car was parked forward and that the space she was in was surrounded by fairly high bushes on two sides that completely blocked the view from the front as well as from the driver's side of the car. So even though the car park was busy, it's not that surprising that no one noticed Penny there until after 12 p.m. One witness reported seeing a man leaving the car park at about 11:15. He was wearing a suit, didn't have any bags with him, and appeared to have some kind of disfigurement on one side of his face. But after stabbing someone more than 50 times, surely the murderer would have had blood all over their clothes. Although the leisure centre is accessed by a busy main road, it backs onto the River Brent with a number of large open fields separating it from the surrounding roads. No one else reported seeing a suspicious person leaving the leisure centre, although one woman called in this unusual incident.
There was a car I could see in the distance up Grinnell towards the swimming pool, really motoring it. And I thought, well, I'll get out before him, which I did. And as I was driving along the Ruislip Road, he was right up behind me. He flashed me, hooted me to get out of the way, and I was angry because he was just driving so fast. I thought, well, I'm not letting him pass. But I got a bit scared as we came up here. I thought, oh, forget it, Pat, pull in.
After Penny's daughter, Lauren, described seeing a wad of cash in her mum's handbag that morning, police discovered that just 3 days before she was killed, Penny withdrew £8,500 from her and Alistair's joint account, a transaction that Alistair states he has absolutely no knowledge of. It is believed that Penny may have had the £8,500 with her at the time of her murder, and it has never been recovered. Her handbag and purse, which she also had with her, were found behind the passenger seat of the car. A meticulous record keeper, Penny would make a note of every withdrawal she made, but for whatever reason, this big transaction went unlogged. While we're on the subject of records, let's talk about the appointment Penny told the builders she had that morning. A check of Penny's diary showed no such meeting arranged for that time. Her husband Alistair also had no knowledge of it. When he found out that Penny had told the builders she had a meeting at 9:50, he said that she must have received a phone call about it earlier that morning. But according to the builders, the phone never even rang. Of course, it is possible that Penny just said she had an appointment so she could make an excuse to leave. It does seem slightly unusual to have an appointment scheduled for 9:50 rather than at 10 o'clock. 3 months after her murder and with no arrests made, Alistair and his business partner put up a £20,000 reward that they hoped would help to find Penny's killer. This was a substantial amount of money to offer, considering that the average annual salary in 1991 was around £11,500.
It is all I can do is to put up money, and I feel very much that it's a last-ditch attempt at trying to get anything out of anybody who knows anything at all. It's just such a difficult thing to live with, and I feel that as time passes by so quickly, we are going to enter a situation where people will not be able to remember the events of early June.
A few days later, on September 27th, Penny was finally laid to rest at St Mary's Church in Denham. Police were convinced that the killer was known to Penny and insisted that she had a public burial so that they could observe the people in the congregation. The next day, photos of the mourning family filled the pages of national papers. A bereft Alistair with his arms around his two young children, both dressed in their school uniforms. In December 1991, a new witness got in touch with the UK TV programme Crime Watch, who aired an update to Penny's case. As she'd been driving so slowly on the road leading up to the leisure centre, a number of cars were honking and overtaking her. The witness was a passenger in one of those cars, and as he passed, he saw Penny mouthing something. The words she was mouthing were "help me." He also described seeing a man in the passenger seat, though his description differed from the previous witnesses. He described him as between 30 and 35, of medium build and smartly dressed, with dark swept-back hair and a mole on his left cheek, wearing a ring on his right ring finger. A photo fit was created, but in spite of the new information and the reward put forward by Alistair, still no solid leads could be found. A year after the murder, a family friend and former builder called John Richmond got in touch with a newspaper, saying that he would give them details of the events leading up to Penny's death, but only in exchange for £80,000. John claimed that he and Penny had been having an affair and that he had gone to see her on the day that she was murdered, and sure enough, his prints were found inside her car. According to him, she had been murdered by a contract killer, but there isn't any indication as to why anyone would have ordered her death. John was promptly arrested and questioned by police, but in the end was released without charge. Speaking to a newspaper in July of 1992, a spokesman for Scotland Yard said, quote, "His bail has been cancelled and he is no longer required. We can't be more categorical than that. He is completely in the clear," end quote. That same article announced that the police team assembled to look into Penny's murder had been disbanded, and after that the case went cold. Hope was briefly renewed in 2000 when blood samples from Penny's car were sent to the lab to be tested again using newer, more advanced forensic techniques, but sadly they came back with nothing. Penny's daughter Lauren has since spoken out about the police's poor treatment of forensic evidence in the case. According to her, they'd removed Penny's fingernails, presumably to test them for any DNA or fibre evidence, but somehow managed to lose them, not finding them again until 17 years later, by which time they were far too contaminated to use. Likewise, Penny's car was taken away to be examined but then left unprotected, losing or contaminating a number of clues that may have led to the killer. Years passed with little mention of Penny in the media until 2008, when it was revealed that a known killer and rapist was to be interviewed in relation to her murder. Robert Napper, who suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, had been serving time at Broadmoor Prison since 1995, after murdering 27-year-old Samantha Bissett and her 4-year-old daughter Jasmine the year before. In December of 2008, he admitted to the murder of Rachel Nichol, a 23-year-old who'd been stabbed 49 times as she walked on Wimbledon Common with her son in 1992. Due to the frenzied nature of the attacks, police wanted to question Napper about Penny as well as 2 other murders. One was of 16-year-old Claire Tiltman, and the other of 47-year-old Jean Bradley. Claire Tiltman was stabbed more than 40 times in Kent, 6 months after the murder of Rachel Nichol, while Jean Bradley was stabbed 30 times as she got out of her car in West London 2 months later. When the move to interview Napper was announced, Lawrence Allison, a professor of forensic psychology at Liverpool University, said that it was important to consider Napper as a suspect, saying, quote, "Statistically, frenzied knife attacks that appear motiveless are pretty rare. These were all in the early 90s. The victims suffered multiple knife wounds, and certainly 2 of them were geographically close, end quote. It is worth pointing out, however, that there are some key differences between Penny's murder and the 3 murders Napa was found guilty of. At 43, Penny was significantly older than Napa's other victims. Napa also tended to strike in open areas like parks, whereas Penny was killed in the confined space of her car. He was also a serial rapist, and Penny had not been sexually assaulted. In total, the police have done 8,000 interviews and taken 2,500 written statements. Aside from Robert Napa, no suspects have ever been named in the case. They believe that Penny's murderer was known to her, but in the 27 years that have passed, they have never been able to find a motive. Following Penny's murder, her 11-year-old son Matthew went to boarding school, leaving 9-year-old Lauren at home with Alistair. Struck by a terrible depression, the preceding years were tough for Alistair and his daughter, and when she turned 19, he asked Lauren to move out of their home. The pair haven't spoken in more than 10 years. Lauren lost all memory of her mother, no doubt to try and cope with the tremendous grief surrounding her death. She's tried to get them back, visiting her old family home and even undergoing hypnotherapy, but to this day they've never returned. She continues to speak to the press periodically to keep her mother's name in the papers, never giving up hope that one day her murder may finally be solved. She suffered a breakdown at the age of 21, but through years of therapy has come out the other side. Despite a childhood marred by tragedy, Lauren has gone on to live a full and happy life. She still lives in Buckinghamshire, not far from the house she grew up in, and is the director of a successful events company. In 2014, Lauren gave birth to a baby girl. Her name, of course, is Penny. Thank you so much for listening to the second episode of the Case Remains podcast. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @CaseRemains, and you can also visit my website www.caseremains.com, where you can find write-ups on missing persons cases and unsolved mysteries. Until next time, stay safe.